So this is going to be a video to explain a little bit of the Jira process. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to ease you into it without actually going into a bunch of project management terminology and things that would probably just be confusing and more damaging than helpful right now. What I'm going to show you is a very simplistic flow, and we'll start to map this towards how we work as what we would call a methodology or just a process in a more formalized way later. For right now, let's just focus on this tiny little flow. So what I want to show you is I want to show you kind of the history of where this idea came from. So in game studios and other, say, product-driven processes in the past where things are being built and there's a series of steps in order to get a product completed, there was this sense of task board that's there. You might have something like this if you have a lot of things to do at home, and that may just be in the form of like your calendar that you hang on the wall, your little whiteboard calendar, or something kind of like that, just to keep track of what it is that you do. So the idea of this kind of came from this columnized principle where you would take things and put them on Post-it notes. Those would be your tasks or your things that you wanted to achieve in a period of time as a task. And so what you would do is you would put them into a column that is the column of I have not done anything with this yet. So it would be like your to-do column. So I have things to do. And then what you would do is you would then move those into things that you're currently working on into a column called in progress. And that means that you're currently working on that thing. When you're done, you move it over to the done column. And so there was these three columns that appeared with this task management system. There was the things I have not done, things I'm currently doing, and then the things I've completed. We've streamlined this process over the years to have a series of stages, and we simply call these swim lanes. So for each swim lane, think of each swim lane translated as just a column. So each swim lane can have its own name and really its own status. So that's kind of roughly where these things come from. Let's go back to Jira real quick. So in Jira, what we've done is we have a series of these swim lanes, and they work just like as such. You have tasks that you have not done anything with. Those are your backlog. And then you have the tasks that you have selected for development, meaning these are the tasks that we want to prioritize, that we want to work on. So the idea would be to have a bunch of tasks that anything that anybody suggests for our game that seems like a good idea, we would put a task in the backlog. The tasks that we think like, hey, these are really good, we should definitely work on these things, and we should work on these things now. Now as far as meaning in this phase, this release phase. For instance, here we're targeting a friends and family build. So if we say that these are things that are important to our current phase, we would select those for development. So they go in this column here. Now, as people start to work on these, like for instance here, Anthony is currently working on this task called 3D phone test deployment. We're going to move that over into in progress. And so Anthony would go ahead and just simply take his task, drag it, and drop it in the right column. And then it will go ahead and change the status of this here. Now, if Anthony has any task or you have any task info, you could add comments to your ticket and just say, hey, I'm working on this currently. I've encountered an issue. I've talked to so-and-so about this, and we're working on it. That can let somebody know the history, kind of in a journalistic sort of fashion, of what's going on status-wise with this ticket here. When Anthony's completed or you are completed with your ticket, you simply would move these over to the done column, and then that would complete it out. So in this instance here, we have some people that have already completed some of their tickets by simply just moving them right bound. The idea is to keep everything moving right. So if they can move right, awesome. It goes a little bit further. There's different ways to organize this board. This is probably a way that we'll end up organizing our board to start. There's different ways in which you can agree to work. It is currently popularized to use something called the Agile methodology. And that is a process for working. And there are some different frameworks or templates, if you will, for how you can achieve work. The two major ones are Scrum and Kanban. I'm not going to talk about those there, but that's just if you want to know more faster. Those are the two frameworks that you can follow for work, and that's kind of where we're going right now. So if you want to know kind of a little bit more ahead, that will get you there. For right now, I just want you to focus on this columnistic sort of approach where we take tasks and we move them right through the columns. So in this case here, what we're going to end up doing is we're going to create some new columns. And these new columns are going to help us identify, in fact, what we're going to do is, here we go. And we're going to not have yellow. We're going to have black. And this is going to look a little messy. I apologize. We're going to add some columns here. Not very good at this here, but yeah, that'll work. Okay, so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to create a bunch of tasks, put them in the backlog, and then as these tasks are put in the backlog, what we can do is we can select some of these tasks and then move them. We can move them into the prioritized selected for development column. And depending on who they belong to, once we select these and we're going to start working on these, if this ends up being an engineering task, we can take it and put it in the in progress engineering tab. Now, we only have a couple of engineers that are working on this project. We're going to assume that each engineer can work on one thing at a time. So if that's the case, depending on how many engineers that we have, we're going to assume that we have 3 engineers. What we're going to do is we're going to put a working limit on this column. So we cannot work on more than these many things at once in this column. If we do, we run the risk of working on too many things at once. That would not be good. So what we end up doing is we create a system in which you can easily identify if you can move work to in progress, and you have this pull system that you can pull work through each one of these columns. We have quite a few artists, and because of this, we're able to work on quite a few more art things than we are engineering things. We're going to go ahead and say that we can work on about 5 things in the art column, whereas design, we can only work on 1 thing at a time, and engineering 3. So in this case here, if we end up having a lot of tasks in the backlog, and once we say that we're prioritizing some of these tasks here in the selected for development, that means that we're going to try to work on these in a specific sort of release fashion. So this could be things like we want our character to be able to encounter a new sort of power up or something that augments their movability, like something that they can do that's different. So we'd say that this needs to be designed out. It's a design task. Cool. So design goes ahead and completes the design for this. Then design says, well, now that we know what we've designed against, I've created a task in order for it to get done on the engineering side of things. I've also created a task for artists. And so what's going to end up happening is that feature task is going to, for the engineers, for the functionality, is going to go to the engineers. The artists are going to get one of the tasks as well. So they're going to go ahead and work on this here, but notice that we only have the ability to work on 3 at a time. So in this case here, what Jira is going to do is it's only going to allow you to have 3 of these in that column at any time. If you try to move a 4th, it will block you from doing that, simply because we've put a limit on each column. Now this helps. Why do we do this? So we have the ability to only focus on a few things at once. As humans, we're terrible at multitasking. There's no way around that. So with these limits, what we do is we agree to a number that we can prove is a very workable number. And this number is something usually within some sort of like either gut reaction of somebody or it's proven track record. Take juggling, for instance. For me, I can only juggle 2 things at once. So if somebody handed me like 2 little bowling ball pins or something to juggle, I can only do 2. I can't do 3. So if somebody threw me a 3rd one to try to juggle with, I actually can't do a traditional juggle. I would drop the 3rd one. So my limit is only 2. For some people, that may be more. You may be able to do 3 or 4 or 5. So it's important to take all of this into consideration once we're talking about our team here. For the sake of simplicity, we're going to assume that our team can only work on 1 thing at a time. It's a pretty good generalization there. So, but this number can be adjusted as we see fit. So as the team gets their tasks and they go through the process of completing it, they go to the done column. And when these go into the done column, they simply allow for more tasks to be pulled from the selected from development straight into their respective departments. We'll assume that this one's a design task, so it can go over there. Right? So if we run out of tasks to do, that's not a terrible thing. It just means that we have completed a lot. The idea behind this workflow is that when you get enough things done to schedule a release, these things can go into a new build. And this is what goes to the customers or clients. So usually what you try to do with this here is you try to only pull the things from the backlog and put them in the selected development that you would say all map towards a singular build. So if you say, hey, everyone, we're trying to get a new zone up. So all of these tickets here might end up being tickets for zone, say 5 or 6, just as an arbitrary example, but those are the ones we're actually working on. We would then create tickets that would say, hey, engineering, we need you to hook up the new zone. Hey, design, we need you to design the new zone. Hey, art, we need you to do the background for the new zone. And all of these things have dependency of when they need to get done, right? Design needs to come first. Then we can do art, then we can do engineering. So they have different dependency chains. We'll need to prioritize those so that they are in this column here, selected for development first, and then we can move them through to whatever department they belong to. And then once that department completes it, it goes into done. And once it's in this column, we can gather all of the ones that we have selected for development. And once they all hit the done column, we can build. If we find that these features can be built faster, what we can end up doing is taking a couple of these and say, even if there's just 1 per ticket, doesn't matter. This is up to us to decide. We can generate builds for as frequent as we want for each ticket that is or series of tickets that hit the done column. So that's up to us to decide. That sounded weird. So just so you know, this actually has a name. It's called Kanban. It's a continuous task polling system. And that's something that I'll talk to you a little bit about later. It's from the Japanese product market, invented by Toyota. So if you want to look up its history, that's where it came from. It means a signboard or literally a vision sort of board. And so that's kind of where it comes from. Think of this I don't know if you guys have eaten sushi a lot. If you do go there, a sushi menu is basically a Kanban process. You see something you want, and you say, I want to do that. So you select the quantity of them, which this here, as soon as you select something, you're saying this is selected for development, food development in this case. And the quantity is telling you how many of these things we can pull at once. And then they're delivered to your table, you as the customer hitting the done column. You eat it, and then you say, cool, I want more. I want one of these here, and the process repeats, and it's continuous until you're done. That's exactly what we're doing here. So let's go back to Jira real quick. So Jira's a little confusing for some of the stuff here. They have a bunch of columns that we're going to be fleshing out. I haven't created those yet, but it's going to follow exactly what we just did in Paint. So you're going to see up in here in Jira, these little limits, these little numbers at the side of the column are going to be your work in progress limits. For each column, there will be a limit imposed. So that's just something that we're going to set up before we take off here. Moving on. If we find that, say for instance, and this could come in the form of feedback over Slack, Discord, or any other tool that we use, or just even in casual conversation, somebody has a great idea for a feature. This can come from any member of our team. It's most valued when it comes from the customers. So feedback from the customers is the most important feedback that we care about. So say, for instance, here was something that was thrown out a little bit earlier. We want the ability for our players to actually, let me look. I forgot what it was. We want the UI elements wherever that they exist in the game. We want to have a preference where extra UI elements can be moved around once we start the game. So they can position their UI elements strategically, so that way if they're streaming the game with some sort of platform like Twitch, then we can reposition UI elements so that they don't block the probably webcam part of where the person's trying to put it on as an overlay for their Twitch feed. So that's a great feature. We should put that in our backlog here. So in Jira, you can use the C or Create Plus tool up here, and you're going to hit that, and then it's going to ask you what kind of issue do you want to make. Now, just so that you know, a task is a task. It's simply as that. It's the thing that you need to do. It's an action. So task is an action. Story. What the heck is a story? So a story is something that is very common and popular in the agile methodologies. And what a story is a story is a feature that is written from the perspective of the user. So what do I mean by that? So I mean this. You write the task in the perspective of whoever is going to be requesting that feature. So in the case here where UI elements could potentially get in the way of streamers, you would write a story with this you would write a story with this format. You would say and then it would be role, this role, I would like, and then you would put description, so that, and then you would describe usually action. Something like that. So here's how that would work as a story. So if we were to describe that task as a story, we would say, as a, you can see I already did one. As a streamer, I would like a feature to be able to move my UI icons around for gameplay so that I can host my webcam stream without overlap. So that's kind of wordy there. But the reason why you word it this way with this sentence is because it tells you who is going to want it, why they want it, and how they would want to use it. That's a very, very valuable way to communicate what this is supposed to be as its fully completed feature. So if we can complete this sentence here, then we've completed the criteria of this here. So notice that it's an outcome. It's not an action. Tasks are more like action. So you will typically see the little blue task icon for anything that's an action. Story icon, definitely if it's more of a high level outcome. Why? Well, hey, because this is not written in a format where you can easily just say, oh, I do step 1, 2, and 3. Somebody has to look at this and say, what are the actions in order to map to the outcome of this here? So I have the outcome. What are the actions? So you would probably say like ability for the user to tap an icon and say, I want to move this around, and then drag it around the screen and then say, I want to save that. You would probably need to store that's where that position is and bind it with their account. The reason being is because if I open that game back up, I don't want to have to go and reposition that UI every single time I open up the app. That would be annoying. So I'd want to reposition it, and then I would want to save it and have that save be noted every time that I log back in the app. So that there's a series of actions in order to get to this outcome. It's not just, do one thing and be done. So stories tend to get broken down into smaller actions. So sometimes if you see a story here, you'll see it exist in the backlog and then assigned to somebody. Usually somebody will then take that story and then break it down into a series of tasks. So it's a process and a flow that you should get used to, simply because it's easy for somebody like me as a producer, or somebody like Anthony as a creative director or a product owner, to put these up for the team, and then the team can then turn around and break them down into a series of actions. So that way you know all of the steps in order to get there, and then some people can even take this and work on them parallelized. So what I mean by that is, like, say for instance here, we probably are going to want new UI icons in order to do the saving and all that other stuff, like I was mentioning, because we would want the player to have their stuff remembered where they're at. So we may even have a button in the settings menu that says save, like save layout. So I would probably need an artist to make a button for that. So art is engaged in this, engineering is engaged in this, and I would probably want those buttons to make sound. So we might even have the sound engineer involved in this. We may need a UI designer involved in this. So we may have quite a few people involved in this. So when this gets broken down to do a series of tasks, it may end up being like 6 or 8 tasks for different people. So once that, it's broken down, this can then just go say, oh, this is done once all of those smaller actions are done. So anyway, that's a little bit more advanced, but I just wanted to show you kind of roughly how that process was. Now, I actually went through the whole process of creating a ticket. As I was creating it, I'll go ahead and hit the plus button again, come back in here. So if we have a task, we write what it is that the task is going to do, and you would just start writing things. So ability to do stuff. So if you write a task to say the ability to do stuff, that's not an actual task. I'm just trying to paraphrase something. Then what you would want to do is you would want to say success criteria and write the success criteria. If you were wanting to tell your team or anybody that's supposed to work on this what needs to happen in order for this to be successful, this is the place that you want to do that. You would say, in order to do stuff, we need to open computer, do things, and profit. Sure. You have a priority field where you can say how high of a priority is this. If it's very, very critical that we get this done, you can set it, high. If it's like, this is kind of cool, but we don't need this, it just would be kind of cool if somebody did it, we can set the priority lower. You can give it labels. What do you mean by labels? These just give it something like parsable or searchable. Something like for instance, like a label. You can create design. So it's like, this is part of design. That just lets everyone know that it belongs to a specific label. Say if also too, you wanted to kind of bind it to another sort of searchable field. Whoops. Well, I keep hitting the space bar. Every time I hit the space bar, it's going to do that. Friends and family, 1.2. Maybe that build or something like that. You could tag it with different tags so that way they know what's coming on. If you have an image or something to say like, hey, this is, something that is bound with that. Like say, for instance, if it's art and you did a mock-up, right? Tabor did a mock-up or something like that. You can take that and you can drag it and drop it and then attach that to this here. So I just grabbed something off of the my desktop here, which looks like it's a video or something like that, and drag it and drop it, and then it attaches that as an attachment. I'm not going to do that. You could also link issues if you want. So say, for instance, if like this new task is blocked by another task, you can link another previous task to it just so that they can see like, hey, there's a dependency here. That's a little bit advanced, so we're not going to talk about that. Who does this go to? You can assign it to somebody. If you don't know who to assign it to, you can leave it unassigned. And yeah, and then you would hit create. I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. I'm going to show you one just so that you can see it. So Zone 6 concept art background. So what this is saying is that we're going to create a concept art for Zone 6, specifically the background. So somebody that works on this task, what's the success criteria to make this task successful? Well, we would need first a mock-up clearly depicting enough detail to allow artistic direction approval of Zone 6, meaning we want a rough block out of what Zone 6 should look like. The mock should follow STIDE Guile rubrics and the game's design core pillars, meaning we should make it fit in the universe, so it should look like it belongs. And we should also follow Tabor's style guide and rubric that he's kind of put up, and it should check it against the old works that we've done, all the other backgrounds that are currently implemented. Does it fit? Does it make sense? Does it follow all of these stylistic sort of guide principles that have been established? Lastly, we should have a strategy delivered for breaking up the dynamic elements of this zone background. This can include sprites that will move, animate, light up, or become interactable. So basically, you're just wanting to say like, hey, I'm gonna deliver a plan or at least a discussion points of all of the things that we plan to be dynamic elements in this background. Meaning like these are the things that are gonna move around, blink, animate, do whatever. For instance, the mines had blinking lights. So anything that has a dynamic feel to it needs to be called out as well in the mockup. So if this is to be successful, you would literally hand this to Tabor and say, hey, Tabor, look, I did a mockup. I made sure it followed all of our guidelines, and here are the things that I think can be animated with my background. What do you think? So that would give you the ability to check this off as done and move it all the way over the done column if you did all of those things. So that's an example of one of these tasks. So how do we work on this? Myself, Tabor, or Anthony will move tickets here. They will then get assigned to a person. And then once it's assigned to a person, that person can then move it throughout the columns. Once something is ready to be looked at or is done, it then goes to the done column. Simple as that. So what's going to appear later on? We're going to have each column represent a department. And once those departments have their limits established and all that, once you see that there are spaces open and there's stuff that has been allocated to the selected for development column here, we're going to have you grab those things and move it to your respective department. So if you're an engineer and you see an engineering task in selected development, you can grab that as long as you have the space and bandwidth to pull it on and put that in your in progress column. Once that's done, you can move it to the done column. Simple as that. All right, so I'm going to stop here. I think that gives you enough to see how Jira is going to work. There are a couple of more things that you can do. If this stresses you out to see just all of this junk, you can filter this by only your issues, and it will only show issues that are assigned to you. So for instance, I'll assign one of them to me just so you can see what this looks like. Only my issues. Now I only see the tickets that apply to me. So it's something that you could do. Cool. All right. That is the basic core elements to working in Jira now. Just to get you started, we'll be talking a lot more about production later. Hope that helps.